This happened a few months ago. I've been driving for Lyft for a few years now, and I usually stick to late night shifts. The roads are quieter, and the tips are better, but there is a trade-off. Every once in a while, you get a story that sticks with you, and not in a good way. I'd always thought of myself as careful. I've dealt with my fair share of odd passengers, but nothing, and I mean nothing, even came close to being as strange as what I'm about to tell you. I didn't have a dash cam at the time, and that night was the main reason I installed one. It started off normal enough, just me and the odd sounds my car would occasionally make. I've got this beat-up 2005 Volvo, but it's reliable as hell. The streets were quite literally deserted, which, like I said earlier, I preferred. Sometime after 2 a.m., I got a request from a convenience store nearby. Seemed harmless at first, but for some reason I got this weird feeling in my gut about it. You ever get that feeling, like something's off, but you can't explain why? That's exactly what hit me as I drove up, before I even saw the guy. I figured out why I was getting that gut feeling. The convenience store I was pulling up to was closed, all the lights were off, and there was not a single car in the lot. As I pulled closer, I saw him. I made sure to drive pretty slowly so I could get a good look at him. He was pacing outside the store, wearing this ratty hoodie that looked like it hadn't seen a washing machine in years. I'm not kidding about that. There was literally a hole in the sleeve. His movements were jerky, like he couldn't stand still, and he kept glancing over his shoulder like he thought someone was after him. If I had to guess, he was on something. I probably should have just cancelled the ride and driven away. I even hovered my finger over the cancel button, but I didn't. For whatever reason, I unlocked the doors, and he slid into the back seat without a word. I regretted my decision the moment I took my foot off the brake. Most people either scroll on their phones or stare out the window, but not him. He just sat there, staring at me through the rearview mirror. Not blinking, not looking away, just staring directly at me. I tried not to stare back, but I couldn't help but catch his eye a couple of times. He looked kind of angry, which was also pretty unsettling. I tried to ignore him and turned on the radio to break the silence. I don't even remember which station I clicked on, but the moment the music started playing, he snapped at me to turn it off. His voice was deep and a little raspy, and I could tell he was a smoker right away. That kind of caught me off guard, and I jerked the steering wheel a little bit. I resisted the urge to look at him in the mirror, and just did as he said, gripping the wheel a little tighter. I didn't say anything, and we drove in silence for a while. I thought maybe he'd just sit there quietly until we got to his stop. That's what I was hoping for, at least. But then he spoke. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. He asked me if I'd ever picked up someone I shouldn't have. That question hit me like a brick. I let out this awkward laugh and said, "Well, I hope not." I was trying to keep it light, but he didn't react. He just leaned back and muttered something to himself that I couldn't hear. Then he started going on about how he used to be an Uber driver and how he quit because some punks stole stuff from his car. He was slurring his words a bit, so I couldn't make out everything he said, but I got the gist of the story. I looked in the mirror once or twice while he was telling me the story, and I realized he was smiling the whole time, which was incredibly unsettling. A normal person wouldn't smile talking about something like that. He concluded his story by saying, "It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you." That comment was what did it for me. I started thinking about him as more of a threat than just a crazy drug addict. Unfortunately, there wasn't much I could do about it. I felt my pulse speed up. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was spinning. I glanced at the GPS, focusing on the destination like it was some kind of lifeline. But the guy did not know when to stop talking. He kept babbling about nonsense, some of it concerning, some of it just gibberish. I honestly couldn't keep up. Eventually, he started apologizing to someone, although I don't think it was me. He began insinuating that he had just done something awful, and that he was a bad person. He kept saying, "I didn't mean to," repeatedly, followed by a few frantic ums. I didn't respond, worried that he'd do something if I did. I didn't know what he'd done or what he was capable of, but I wasn't about to find out. We were only a few minutes from his stop when he snapped out of his muttering haze and yelled at me that I had missed the turn. I didn't miss it. The GPS clearly showed we were on track, but I slammed on the brakes anyway, mostly out of fear. He demanded that I pull over, so that's what I did. My hands were shaking at that point. I just wanted the nightmare to be over. As soon as I shifted into park, headlights appeared behind us. It was a police car. I said a silent prayer and watched as it crept down the road, its spotlight briefly sweeping over my car. The guy in my back seat slouched down like he was trying to stay out of sight. I turned my head and saw him lying almost perfectly flat on my back seat, his eyes closed. I whipped my head back around before he saw me, trying to keep my breathing steady. He stayed in that position for a really uncomfortable amount of time. I wanted to ask him to leave, but decided against it. Eventually, he lifted his head and told me I had gotten lucky. Before I had a chance to do anything, he opened my car door and disappeared. I ended up calling my shift short after that. I was shaken up and didn't feel like driving around anymore. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I came across something on my phone that proved just how dangerous of a situation I had been in. According to a news article, a convenience store had been robbed on the night I picked up that passenger. It was 2 blocks from where I had picked that guy up. It makes me sick knowing I was inches away from a dangerous criminal who could have harmed me if he had chosen to. I'm a little scared to contact the police about this. I try to avoid law enforcement for various personal reasons I won't get into. I'm not really sure if my report would even help. Either way, I'm much more cautious about who I let in my car. Second story. I used to live in the city, but after a messy divorce, I needed a change of scenery. That's how I ended up in a remote cabin deep in the woods. It wasn't much, just a small place with the bare necessities, but it was peaceful, and that's what I needed most. At first, the solitude was nice. No sirens, no honking, no noisy neighbors. Just the sound of nature and the occasional rustling of animals in the brush. But over time, that quiet started to feel different. It's hard to explain, but at some point, it didn't feel like I was alone anymore. I started noticing small things at first, things that could be written off as my own forgetfulness. My back door would be unlocked when I was sure I had locked it. A mug that I never used would be sitting in the sink. The blanket on my couch would be folded differently than I had left it. I chalked it up to stress, maybe even paranoia. The divorce had taken a toll on me after all. But then something happened that I couldn't explain away. One night, I woke up to the sound of my front door creaking open. My heart nearly stopped. I knew for a fact that I had locked it before going to bed. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept beside my bed and crept toward the living room, my hands shaking. The door was wide open, swinging slightly from the wind. I flipped on the light, expecting to see someone standing there. But there was no one, just the empty doorway and the darkness beyond it. I stepped outside cautiously, scanning the tree line for any movement. The moonlight barely illuminated the dense forest around me. My stomach was in knots. If someone had been there, they had to be close by. But I saw nothing, heard nothing. I locked the door and pushed a heavy chair in front of it before retreating to my room. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The next morning, I checked the security camera I had installed on my porch just a few weeks prior. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the footage. At around 3 a.m., the door had slowly creaked open, on its own. No figure, no movement, just the door opening as if someone had pushed it from the outside. But that wasn't the worst part. As I continued watching the footage, I noticed something in the reflection of the window near the door. A shadowy figure, standing completely still, watching me. I haven't slept properly since. Third story. My name is Luke, and my girlfriend Catherine and I met 3 years ago as freshmen in college. We go to Stanford, which has been my dream school since I was 8. Neither of us are from California. Pretty far from it, actually. We're both from Ohio, her from Cincinnati and me just outside Columbus. I think that's a big reason we were so attracted to each other. People from similar areas are naturally drawn to each other for whatever reason. Stanford's not a huge school, but most of the student body is originally from California, so being from the Midwest definitely differentiates us. One of the traditions we've created is how we split Christmas between our families. Catherine's popular amongst my relatives, so her presence is always appreciated and welcomed, damn near expected at this point. Since her house is just a 2-hour drive from mine, We decided early on to spend Christmas Eve with my family, who celebrates Christmas Eve night, and then drive through the night to her house for Christmas Day. Until I met her, I didn't realize that most families celebrate Christmas on the day of, not the night before. Oddly enough, my favorite part of the holiday isn't Christmas Eve or Christmas Day though. It's that late night drive. It's become its own little tradition, something we both look forward to every year. The first time we did it still remains one of my favorite memories with her. Because of where I live, the quickest route from my house to hers doesn't take us on a major highway. Most of the route is quiet back roads, just fields, trees, and the occasional distant farmhouse. It's always really late at night when we do it, so in combination with the secluded route, we rarely encounter any other cars. It feels like the world is asleep, and we have it all to ourselves. Don't laugh, but we always blast Juice WRLD during the drive. His music has been a shared obsession since we met. I know his music is a little cringy, but something about singing the lyrics together is really special. It's like we're in sync. This past Christmas Eve started like any other. After a wholesome night with my entire extended family, we packed up my car around midnight and hit the road. The snow was falling lightly and the roads were deserted as expected. With the music and heat cranked up, everything felt perfect. That all changed in an instant though. What I'm about to describe to you is still one of the most unsettling things I've ever experienced. Probably the most unsettling thing. I was driving along when the music was interrupted by my phone ringing. I glanced down, a little irritated that I'd be getting a call this late. It was an unknown number. I ignored it without thinking. Probably a scam call. Those things are constant these days. Catherine made a joke about how committed those call center guys must be, making calls on Christmas. I laughed in agreement, and that was that. But then, a few minutes later, my phone rang a second time. I again looked down and saw that it was another unknown number, probably the same one as before. I sighed, irritated, but let it go to voicemail. Catherine glanced at me and raised her eyebrow, but didn't say anything. I tilted my phone towards her to show her that it was an unknown number, and she said, "That's so weird," with a confused look. I didn't respond, just shrugged my shoulders. The music eventually resumed, and I tried to take my mind off the phone calls. But of course, not 2 minutes later, my phone rang again. I was pissed at that point, cursing under my breath as I fumbled wildly for my phone. I snatched it from the console and swiped aggressively across the screen, ready to tell whoever it was to screw off for spamming my phone. I could tell I startled Catherine as her body tensed up with my sudden movements. In hindsight, I probably overreacted, but I was sick of being harassed. I basically barked, "Hello?" into the phone with as sharp a tone as I could muster. I expected the scam script to begin, but instead I was met with silence. I turned up the volume in my car and immediately picked up on a faint static coming from the other side of the line. I was about to hang up when a man's voice spoke. The voice didn't belong to anyone I knew. "Hello, Luke." I was so caught off guard I nearly swerved off the road. I couldn't speak. I felt my whole body starting to itch, which always happens to me when I'm nervous. Before I could respond, the man continued. He started reciting personal information, my full name, my address, details about my life that no stranger should know, details that no stranger could know. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. I wanted to pull over on the side of the road, but I kept driving like I was in some kind of trance. I considered shouting at him, but decided that anger wasn't the best response in a situation like this. After he paused for a few tense moments, I finally spoke. I asked him what he wanted in a steady voice, trying to hide the fear I was feeling. The voice paused before delivering the words that made my blood run cold. He said that he wasn't here for me, that he was here for Catherine. Hearing my girlfriend's name was about 100 times more terrifying than hearing my own, and the horrified expression on her face told me that she was just as shocked as I was. I blurted out that I didn't know a Catherine, that he must have the wrong number. The man chuckled before saying, "She's sitting right next to you." That was too much for me. I pulled over on the side of the road. I had no choice. My hands were literally shaking with fear. I was about to say something when Catherine reached into my lap in one fluid movement and hung up the phone. Just like that. I literally screamed in her face, demanding to know why she hung up on a stranger who was making personal threats toward us. She didn't answer, just looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. I desperately tried to call the number back, once, twice, 3 times, but it never went through. Catherine told me to keep driving, which I ultimately did, but not before questioning her. She told me she was scared and that I couldn't blame her for hanging up, which I guess was fair. I drove off in silence, but I still couldn't understand why she'd hung up the phone. I don't know whether I was more furious or afraid. Part of me was expecting that number to call back, but after about 10 minutes, I felt like it was increasingly unlikely. At one point, I looked over at Catherine and saw tears in her eyes. She told me she didn't feel safe, which I empathized with. Something in the pit of my stomach gnawed at me though. Catherine and I had been through enough in our relationship to know that trust didn't always come easily. There had been little things, white lies, half-truths, moments where I caught her being less than honest. I knew I was being paranoid though. How could she possibly have anything to do with this? The rest of the drive was silent. I didn't play the music again, and neither of us spoke. My mind was still spinning with a million unanswered questions. Who the hell was that guy? How did he know so much about me? Only my family knew where we were driving that night, and they'd never pull a stunt like this. I was 100% sure of it. I couldn't think of another explanation though. Even when we finally pulled into Catherine's driveway, I didn't feel much better. It's been almost a month since this happened, and I have yet to get my answers. Neither of our family members were responsible. We asked all of them. Catherine swears she's just as clueless as I am, which leads me to believe the person on the other end of the phone call had sinister intentions. You might think I'm overreacting to a harmless prank, but I'm telling you, other than our family members, there are no people on earth who knew Catherine and I would be driving that night. I've been really tense ever since. I can't help but brace myself every time my phone rings. I know he's going to call me again eventually. It's just a matter of time.